In conversation with me today is Busisiwe Mavuso, the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. This conversation, as others, is part of a series of conversations to determine the role of women in crisis situations, but also in terms of governance, democratic consolidation, and peace building. How do women create a space for all people to inhabit their full humanity? Welcome, Busi, and thank you for making the time to share your thoughts and ideas with us for this very important research project through the NIHSS. So, Busi, thank you very much again. And I just want to start with something very important because we're in a very volatile situation in terms of South Africa right now. And I noticed that you have been determined to capture the reality of maladministration and the impact it has on business and the general well-being of South Africans. This despite the cost to your own well-being, because politicians and power elite can often be very vicious. But you stand out because yours is a woman's voice. Can you share with us right at the start what motivates you to act, to speak out, to determine a path to social justice?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Suleiman. Honestly, it's not something I even give much thought to. I think for me, that is what leadership is about. Never mind female leadership, just being a leader. I think for me, it's really about the three things and three things only. It is about being ethical, it is about having a vision, and it is about being courageous. And I think when you look at why or the issues that I raise, it's precisely because I've got a certain view in terms of where South Africa should be. I am very clear in my mind what the economic trajectory of the country ought to be. I also know that South Africa should not be here. It is precisely here because we have scored a lot of own goals as a country. I know what a desired end state for the majority of South Africans should look like. And I really think that all of us as leaders need to depart from that premise. A clear definition of what we'd like to achieve when all is said and done. A clear definition of what a desired South Africa should look like. And I think it is very simple. If you agree that we are engulfed in this poverty, unemployment, and inequality problem, then we know that, a desired end state for South Africa is one where we would have actually dealt with all the triple challenges that we actually have as a country. 75% youth unemployment in terms of the expanded definition is a recipe for disaster. We're really asking for trouble. A lot of people have said, at this rate, we're going to have our own version of the Arab Spring, and it is right. I think if you look at what we experienced, was it July 2021? Time has flown so fast, I don't even remember if it was 2022 or 2021. But if you look at what we experienced with that July anarchy, you saw a glimpse, of what an Arab Spring version of South Africa is going to look like. So the responsibility, therefore, for all of us as leaders is to look at what interventions do we need to put in place to make sure that we achieve that. And what a desired South Africa, as I've said, should look like. So honestly, I'm really guided by those principles. But I think it is also something that is inherent, in me, and I think it is understanding the duties that are bestowed upon me as a leader. Not a lot of people walk the corridors of power that some of us do. Not a lot of people have a seat at the table. So the responsibility, therefore, that is bestowed on us that have a seat on the table is what are we going to do with that power? Someone once said, power unused is power useless. And power from where I come from should be used for empowerment. And I don't know, maybe this is our orientation as female leaders. All these leadership traits that we hold as women, which were previously said to be soft skills, of empathy, of wanting to take everyone along, of consensus building, of all those. I think maybe we should agree that in the environment where we find ourselves at the moment, soft is the new hard. Because all the leadership skills that we actually possess as women, which have actually been said to be soft, are what is required right now to move the country forward. So I really depart from that premise, that if you're going to be fortunate enough and be blessed enough to be given a position of power, then that power should be used for empowerment. So that is honestly my wide view, Dr. Simon.
This is fantastic. I mean, you said soft is the new hard, and that so totally resonates with me because soft means that you have the ability to be empathetic. You have the ability to recognize the pain and the suffering of others, and then to respond to it in that way. And the hard that you speak about, that is originally the patriarchal response and led by men. I think that is what has taken this country down, the path to destruction, because they've totally dissociated themselves from the masses, from the struggling of the people, and from a recognition that the well-being of one is the well-being of everyone. And so we need to focus on that. And to me, this totally resonates. So I want to come to the next question then. And you said it's a part of you, it's an essence within you. But do you feel that your cultural background has also played a part? I mean, you, Busi Mavuso, a Black African leader in South Africa, touched by a whole variety of things. And certainly, I'm sure apartheid and the effect of apartheid must have been, a strong part of your upbringing. So your cultural background, your political background, your social background, all of these things, do they come to the fore in terms of your response and your ability to speak truth to power?
Yes, it definitely does. It definitely does because, the issues of poverty, unemployment, and inequality that I'm talking about, I don't read them from the newspaper, Dr. Suleiman. I see it every day. I've got my own brothers and sisters, I've got my own cousins, I've got my own friends, who are actually engulfed in that poverty, who are engulfed in that hopelessness, who are engulfed in that helplessness. And it becomes such a heavy burden for someone like myself to carry. And I think for those of us who have been fortunate enough, to make it out of the poverty cycle, it's a responsibility because they look at you and they say, if someone like her now occupies a position of power, maybe, just maybe, things for the rest of us would be better. People who never even have seen you from above soap, I think they see themselves in you. They can identify with you because of where you come from. We are all products of our own context. Yes. And my context is very clear, to your point. I matriculated in 1994. So by, all intents and purposes, I'm really a Bantu product, or Bantu education product. When I matriculated in 1994, I didn't have a clue of what I was going to do, not because I had not identified what I'd like to do with my life, but the means to enable me to can achieve that were not there, so you're actually then stuck. And you look at it and you say, what am I going to do? So I've really gotten to realize that, even the most gifted of us, even the most talented of us, even the most intelligent of us, sometimes cannot escape the limitations of our generation or the limitations of our environment or the limitations of where we come from. And I think this is what really, motivates me, to say, at what point will South Africa get to a point where input equals output, where the determination and the effort that you put in will actually result in where you end up? Because unfortunately in South Africa today, that is not the case. You can have the most intelligent child, but because of where they come from, because of they are born on the wrong side of the fence, their future is already predetermined. It's really the St. Alexander paradigm. If you are born on the either side of the M1 highway, it's like your future has already been set out, and if you're born in Sentin, and it cannot be. I think these are all the fundamentals that we were supposed to have made sure that through the necessary policy interventions, through the right definition of a problem statement, Dr. Solomon, if we knew as leaders in this country, when we took over in this country and we actually brought in this democracy, I don't think the problem statement was clearly spelled out. I don't think it was clearly articulated in terms of where we'd like to see the majority of the citizens of this country sitting. That is why we're actually sitting where we're sitting. So I think that is a big driver for me, and I'm really a firm believer, that given half a chance, most of us can be more, or could have been more, and so as a leader, with your context, you therefore have a responsibility to say, what are you actually going to do about that? So as a result, I have a lot of time for people. I'm very deliberate and intentional about giving people a chance, because as I said earlier on, I have witnessed that sometimes even the most gifted of us cannot really escape the limitations of our circumstances and of our environment. And I think some of us, and some of our parents included, could have been more successful in a different kind of world, or in a different kind of country, or in a different kind of era. So we are really suppressed and held back, by the fact that we happen to be born in this environment, which is really unfair.
But Busi, we are now 30 years down the line from the point where you matriculated in 1994, almost 30 years. And if you look at it, you said that, your problem was achieving that means to access what it is that you needed to access. It's 2023. The last 2 months, the university campuses have exploded again. And students are facing the exact same problem now that you faced 30 years ago. But this changed in terms of our leadership and a new political dispensation. So the question, therefore, is that do you think, that the men in charge focus too much on short-term goals, and maybe not even short-term goals, but short-term enrichment and maintaining power, rather than looking at long-term development and success for South Africa, and that the leadership of women, which you say, the soft leadership, which is the new hard, is the total opposite of that. You don't focus on short-term goals. You're looking at overall development, holistic structures, and achieving something far beyond perhaps your own term in office or your own position as a professional woman.
I really do think so. I really do think that there is a big part around short-termism that we're actually seeing from the leadership of this country in particular. It's no secret, Dr. Suleiman, that we rule the country with only 5 years of thought. The thinking from this current leadership is looking at what we just need to be able to do enough to get us through to the next election, or to secure us the next election, which is a very as a short-sighted way, of looking at it, which is a very honestly, for a lack of a better way, stupid way, of looking at it, because what we're playing here is a long game, trying to get the majority of the citizens of this country to participate in the economics mainstream is a long game. As I said earlier on, the problem statement should have really been, clearly defined. And clearly on our side, it looks like it is not. And I think in this current era that we find ourselves, there is a lot of indecisiveness that is actually permeating, which in and of itself is crippling. Someone once said, I'd rather have a leader that is strong and wrong rather than a leader that is weak and right. Because some of the decisions that we actually have to make are timeless. So if you miss the timing of the decision, then unfortunately, even when you make the right decision at the wrong time, it actually will not have the impact, or it will actually be a useless decision. One of the early leadership lessons that I got when I started this journey was that you have to be decisive. Don't be a fence sitter. Choose a side. Take a position. Even when you are critical inside about the decision that you're making, do make the decision still. A lot of leadership is really about showing up. Sometimes you need to realize and appreciate that the only thing that you have going for you is the confidence that people have in you. And former State Secretary of the US, Colin Powell, speaks about the beautiful rule of decision making. He says, he calls it the 40-70 rule of decision making. He says, never make decisions with less than 40% of the information that you are likely to gather, and never make or never gather more than 70% of the information that you can get. Less than 40% you are stalling, and more than, or less than 40% you are guessing, more than 70% you are stealing.
Sterling.
So we have more than 70% of the information, the data, the evidence that tells us, that if decisions are not going to be made, if the necessary critical decisions are not going to be made, to grow our economy, then this country is going to go towards an Arab Spring. So what are we waiting for? What is holding us back? Why are we not actually going ahead, even if those decisions are not going to be popular with some of our, and I'm really talking from a political perspective now, with some of our political principles? Why are we not making the decisions? Because we know, this is more about South Africa Inc., and less about your own political party, as it were. But I must quickly say as well that business is not innocent in all of this, because we should be doing more as business. So I think the same issue of decision making and doing the right thing to benefit the majority of the citizens of this country, I think business is also guilty, of that. It can be right that 30 years into democracy, we are still being forced to implement empowerment policies. Your triple BE in a lot of corporate South Africa continues to be a tick box exercise. It cannot be right, because I think if business knew and if business understood, the importance of implementing the transformation agenda, that actually, if you do this right, it is actually going to be self-serving for you as a business. It will be self-serving because once you take decisions that are actually going to make sure that the majority of the citizens of this country are actually going to benefit and will actually have disposable income. Because when you look at the enterprise and supply development, where you're actually growing entrepreneurs, you give those Black entrepreneurs businesses, they can actually hire a pair of hands or two, and those will be people that will have disposable incomes. And if people have got, and if you hire correctly, to make sure that your company is representative of the country's demographics, which will mainly benefit the Black majority in the expanded definition, then you've got more people with disposable incomes. If people have got disposable income, it means that they can go into your shops to buy, or your businesses to buy goods and services. And if they are buying your goods and services, then demand increases. And if demand increases, then you actually are producing more. If you're producing more, you're earning more revenues and therefore more profits. More profits means more tax revenues, right? I think it is just economics 101. So we're also being very short-sighted as business in terms of not investing in the right policies from a transformation perspective. So the fact that you're still sitting in a country, with an environment of two economies, one nation, is just unsustainable, because no nation in the world can achieve inclusive economic growth by excluding the majority of the citizens of this country. And that is why the transformation agenda is critical from a business perspective. That is why putting the right policies from a political perspective, policies that will enable the majority of the citizens of this country to be included in the economic mainstream, that is why those are important. So you can see both politics and business are actually doing just enough, to be able to get them over the line. But that enough, unfortunately, is not sustainable. That enough, Dr. Suleiman, is not enough to actually usher in the project of justice and equality, because what we achieved in 1994 was democracy. Democracy is a political system. It is not justice, neither is it equality. We still have a responsibility. The World Bank talks about the South African process or journey being an incomplete transition. And it is incomplete because the justice and the equality piece are yet to be ushered in. And business and government in this country have got a responsibility to make sure that we do that.
So you have left, gosh, you have said so much that I probably can write a thesis on that, just simply from what you have said. But I want to touch on something which is very close to my heart, and I'm glad that you raised this. And you speak about the role of business, because business is not entirely innocent from the problems in this country, right? And we know that, and we recognize that. Now, as a woman sitting in a very tenuous position, because you're right in the heart of business, and yet you clearly articulate this need for social justice and for equality. Do you find that although the private sector, business, civil society, etc., are saying that they're trying to find solutions to make things work, that your role as a woman in this very difficult situation is to try and find some kind of symmetry and cohesion, both for the business sector, but also to force that kind of responsibility from the state as well? So in terms of the mandate, is the mandate the same for business, for the state, for civil society, so that all of South Africa can benefit?
Yeah. That's an interesting one, because and it's unfortunate that we still have this binary sort of lens, when it comes to these issues. Because honestly, when we're sitting around the table trying to solve for the problems of South Africa Inc., we are leaders, period, right? But I think in terms of how you are dealt with, the issue of age, the issue of gender still becomes an issue, and I think you have a responsibility, and one has to have the mental toughness, to be able to rise above that. Because you will see and you will find some of the condescending, and somehow the belittling comments, that will be made, that are sort of like putting you in your place, as it were. So it is a very challenging space. But I think I walk into these boardrooms, I walk into these engagements, I take my seat on the table, Dr. Suleiman, with a full understanding that I'm a leader leading leaders, right? I'm not a female leader, I'm a leader, period. And if you choose to see me as a female leader, then that's on you, So I think the fact that I walk into these spaces, especially where there is these multilateral engagements, you are a leader leading leaders. And I think in my case, the first Black African woman to lead white monopoly capital. And I think when you look at the tension between business and government, but business and civil society and business and labor, you are already on the wrong side of the fence, in as far as your government, labor, and civil society colleagues are concerned, right? Because you're supposed to be one of us. You're supposed to be making sure, that this white monopoly capital is doing the right thing, on behalf of the country and on behalf of the people, as it were. So I walk in there and I realize that I'm in a no man's land. I'm really Switzerland. I'm Switzerland because I'm not one of the people that I represent in terms of how I show up, in terms of how I look, in terms of how I present. White monopoly capital, the face of leadership there is white and male, which is the stark and direct opposite of who I am, right? I'm also not one of them in terms of government, civil society, and labor. We may look the same, but I'm representing a totally different agenda, which sort of like makes me an outcast. So I therefore have a tough job of demonstrating, I think, that I am the right person for the job, and I deserve the seat at the table. But I think also in terms of the constituency that I represent, I am precisely what white monopoly capital needs in this country right now. And not just to start tough conversations that big business has to confront in this country today, but also to start tough conversations with government about the state of our country. And of course, these conversations are not easy, because if a white man were to say some of the things that I say to government, you are easily labeled as a racist. I watched the interview with Andre de Ruyter where he was actually highlighting the serious concerning problems at Eskom. The response of government was insults, this white racist, whatever. So I think there are those issues, that what is the right word? The carrier of the message matters, right? Because when I raise these issues, I can't be labeled a white racist, whatever. I'm raising legitimate concerns, and it's not concerns that, as I said to you earlier on, I'm reading about on newspapers. It's my lived experience in terms of how the decisions or indecisions of government are actually impacting our people today, right? But I'm also the right person for white monopoly capital to can actually start the right conversations around, South Africa has to transform. We actually need to do more. So I really often find myself having to contend with numerous competing interests and very diverse views, especially when sitting across the table from government and labor, where each stakeholder is representing their own constituency and trying to drive their own agenda. And it often becomes very apparent to me as a leader in those instances where you are not a homogeneous group and are certainly not like-minded, that as leaders, we do not have the latitude of holding a standard narrative. Having different perspectives is important. Because I think this thing that we're doing, this leadership thing, is really about an appreciation that you lead a complex and interconnected system that you alone cannot resolve. It is about holding various and even competing ideas and perspectives in your mind. It is about considering, it is about listening to, it is about extracting value from diverse viewpoints. It is about learning that sometimes you maybe share more similarities with your so-called enemies than differences. So your role as a leader is to, yes, have a point of view to start a discussion, but you also have an obligation to hear everyone's voice and get everyone involved. So consensus building therefore becomes necessary in that environment. It becomes important for you to understand that as you are trying to drive your single individual or constituency agendas, at the end of the day, this is about making, what is the mantra of the ANC? Giving a better life for all, making South Africa better for the 62 million South Africans that are here. It's not about us. It's really not about personalities. And that is often forgotten when we sit in these meetings.
So it's actually what you're saying to me is that you bring a very mediative process to these meetings or to the discussions between the two opposing parties or diverse views to try and say, come on, guys, we can make this work. Although we look different, we might be speaking differently, but ultimately there is something that we can find common ground on and we can make it work. And I think that for me, from following your work the last few years, I think in many ways you have succeeded in this, because if you look at the role of business during 2021, 2022, if anything, although white monopoly capital has been accused of being the troublemaker and the one that is seen as tearing the fabric of South Africa aside, it's actually white monopoly capital that came to the rescue of the vast majority of South Africans during COVID, the UKZN protests, and even the floods. They came forward and said, what can we do? How can we fix this? Find us the right partner. Let's collaborate. Let's do something, which is the total opposite of what government did. If anything, government failed us spectacularly during these two very pertinent crisis moments. And could it be then said that it is, the vision that you are inputting and the challenges that you bring forth and the questions that you have been raising that has shifted this mindset to turn perhaps business away from being the enemy to being a friend of the people? Because I see a change in the way people are beginning to work with each other, see each other, and turn to each other rather than looking at the state. It's almost as if a parallel state is developing within the state, and people are actually excluding the official state and finding their own way to work and do things.
Yeah. Look, I think probably you may call the role mediative. I think I've seen it as speaking truth to power and speaking truth to my own constituency, bringing the voice that in my view has actually been missing. I walk into those meetings and I'm very clear that my role is not for us to hug and sing kumbaya. The role for us and what is before us is to actually have real conversations where government is missing up. And I've really made it my job to say I'm going to shout at the loudest or at the height of my voice, to actually bring the issues that are necessary for government to actually pay attention to. The issues that we've actually, and honestly, I must say that from when we started trying to make government understand that you can't have the creation of jobs as a focus. The focus needs to be the structural reform agenda. And they kept on pushing back to say that, but business, you are actually changing what we actually agreed during the job summit in 2018 and whatever the cases. And it didn't matter how much we actually tried to show them that jobs will be realized if you have the reform agenda. The reform agenda will give us good policies. Good policies will make our environment conducive and will raise business confidence. Business confidence will make sure that investors or businesses invest. Investment will lead to economic growth. Economic growth will therefore lead to the eradication or the lessening of unemployment. So it took a lot of shouting, screaming, and whatever. So I really thought that I've brought in that voice, Dr. Suleiman, where I know a lot of my colleagues, male colleagues, white male colleagues, get the calls from this because it is a main thing. It is a main thing, right? It is a patriarchy thing. They think they need to come into these meetings and be nice with each other and whatever the case is, and then walk away with nothing being solved. They get the calls to say, rein her in, to say you have to make sure that she's moderated. She can't be going around saying these things. She can't be embarrassing us like that. But I really think that that is precisely what I needed to do, so that you're now sitting with a government that has got, you're seeing this emergence, to your point, of a pro-business ideological shift, an emergence of government understanding. They now accept and agree that the reform agenda, the president has even set up an entire unit within the presidency in the form of the Operation Vulindlela team, because the shouting and the screaming and not being nice and not being cordial, but saying what needs to be said has helped. Because then being cordial and being nice and whatever guy talk, that obviously won't happen. And I think that is another thing which becomes important when we have a strong female leadership presence in the room. The tone of the conversation changes, and the conversation itself changes, right? Because of course, whatever conversation that they used to do, they have to now become cognizant that there is an outsider. So we can't talk the way we always used to talk, and as much as it might be uncomfortable for you, who's actually taking the beating at the meeting, but it is necessary if you are going to change perceptions. So pissing people off, and calling it as you see it, has, I guess, actually worked. So I think we're now sitting with a business. All of us as business leaders actually sit on all different ends of the spectrum. I really think that the role, that I've played is important, but I also think that it is the role that my other colleagues have played. It's important because government needs somewhere or someone to run to, when it comes to business. Can you imagine if all of business was like me? Then, it would have been a stalemate conversation between business and government. So I think we trod along and we're moving towards the right direction, because I'm sure when my colleagues get the call, they therefore have to have a conversation to say, but hey, I think, but the reform agenda is important. And they say, yeah, no, but she can't be saying it like that. She can't be going on public platforms and be writing these things, and embarrassing her. And they say, yeah, no, we'll talk to her. But then, but what is it that needs to be, right? So I think there's sort of like maybe a good cop and a bad cop, scenario that therefore happens. When I took on this role, I remember I spoke to one of my colleagues, and I think Professor Michael Katz, if I can share his name, and I said, Prof, I'm walking into this environment and into this position very worried. I'm worried about the fact that I'm not naive to the fact that I'm not one of you. The people that I'm representing don't look like me. They don't come from where I come from. Their orientation and their lens and their worldview is totally different to mine. So I'm worried that I'm coming into an environment where I will be an outsider. And I don't know how easy or difficult my job is actually going to be, seeing that I'm an outsider. Because those issues, Dr. Suleiman, were raised when I was actually appointed, having to take over from Bonang, to say, who is she? Which JSE listed company has she led before? What is she bringing to the table? So essentially questioning, she's not one of us. And this is a position that has been, previously raised, or rather a position that has actually been previously held, by people who come from where we come from. And I think probably maybe having come from the Black Management Forum, the concern was that, but she was an enemy. She's the one who sat across the table from us, telling us how untransformed we are as corporate South Africa. So I really had that serious concern. And I went and I spoke to Professor Michael Katz to say, how do I actually do this? And I think his response and his words were actually very encouraging. You are saying, but Busi, don't you think that things have not changed and business has not actually played its critical role precisely because the role that has been, or the person that has been at the helm has actually come from this same constituency. This like-mindedness. People that have always done the same thing and expected a different result. She said you've got an opportunity to give direction to business because the leader sets the tone. So come in here and make this thing your own, and we're not going to allow you to fail. As much as we might be skeptical about you, we won't allow you to fail, because if you fail, then business fails. He says, don't underestimate the contribution that you can make. He says, you are in a privileged position and you come with something that we don't have, as other CEOs of the NSA, because you represent the majority of the citizens of this country. So through you, we can be able to position business as a national asset. Because for the first time, maybe an average South African can sit up and pay attention and listen to what business has to say, because the message is being delivered by someone who resonates with them. So he said, you actually have to, and says, don't worry about what they are going to say. He said, one important thing that you're going to have to learn is to differentiate between noise and substance. There's going to be a lot of noise in the position that you're actually assuming, but focus on the substance and run with the substance. So I must really say that I think that really gave me, the confidence, the strength, and the wind, beneath my shoulders that I actually needed. And I understood from that, Dr. Solomon, that I'm not here to be nice. Of course, I'm not here to piss off people, but I'm here to get a job done, and I would have failed South Africa if I'm actually going to perform and assume that role, the same way that my previous or my predecessors would have done. It requires something different if South Africa is going to change.
No, certainly, Busi. Yeah, I think you have changed the perspective in the way in which people view business today. And that's a phenomenal outcome, and it's a huge achievement, if I may say, on your part, because even somebody like myself coming into studies at an early age, we always had a negative image about white monopoly capital, but you have managed to change that. And I think the result is also because of what you have said, is that it's not about having the same people from the same boys club speaking and bringing about the same thing, the same changes. So we're very close to the end, and I want to just get your feelings in terms of what do you think are the most important values or qualities that need to come into building these relationships in terms of all of these difficulties that you face. How important for you is communication, trust, accountability, and more importantly, legitimacy?
Yeah. Look, I think that is the only way in which we get this right. You said trust, communication, legitimacy, and
Accountability.
accountability. That is the only way we get this right. And by the way, not just from political, and I think as leadership, period. Let me not differentiate between politics and business. As leadership, period, it becomes difficult when the trust deficit between business and civil society continues to grow, right? I think the outcome of that is what you saw during the July anarchy, where in our own assessment as business, the attack in July was an attack on the supply chain of business, because it was an attack on our businesses, shops. It was an attack on our on the transport system, our trucks being hijacked and roads being barricaded so that movement of goods can stop. It was an attack, on the distribution warehouses, of businesses. It was an attack on it. Really, we look at it as it was an attack on the supply chain, and we really think it was orchestrated as such. And maybe it was civil society sending a message, to say you're going to have to do more. And I think that is what business needs to take, out of that, unfortunate incident. The business needs to do more. If we were trusted by our communities, and you saw it, Dr. Suleiman, in certain spaces where it was the communities who said, you are not going to touch this shopping mall, or you are not going to touch. So that is what trust does. So I really think that the issue of trust is really an overarching one, Dr. Suleiman, because I think the communication, the legitimacy, I think all of them stem from that. Because I think from a communication perspective as well, we're sitting in an environment where it is now underwhelming when government says it is going to do anything, because we are known of all our great plans, but there's very little in as far as delivery is concerned. So we therefore need to start. It's like we speak left and we walk right. Whatever it is that we actually say, is not the stuff that we actually deliver. So you can see, that communication, would therefore contribute to the trust, element. So it is like trust is an outcome. How you achieve it is through the three below, communicate, but not just communicate. So that at least in communicating, you take people along with you. They know what the true north looks like. They know where you're driving the country to. They know the vision that you have for the country. But communicating it and not delivering is also not, helping. So I think you therefore gain legitimacy by delivering. You communicate and you therefore deliver on what you're actually going to, or on what you've actually promised, which doesn't actually happen in this country. So legitimacy becomes important, but that can only be derived by you, delivering on that which you have actually promised to deliver. And I think there's going to have to be a system where you are actually held accountable, or rather the processes, the system, and has to somehow hold you accountable. So to sit in this environment where you've got ministries that have not delivered over and over again, and the system somehow is not holding them accountable. They are still in those positions. So it's as if it really doesn't matter. The ANC government has actually not delivered, right? And it doesn't look like there is a way in which the country and its citizens can actually hold them, somehow accountable. Business has not delivered in terms of ushering in the transformation agenda. 30 years, into them, we're still sitting with trying to get them to do the right thing. They are still doing this tick box exercise. So if communication, legitimacy, and accountability are not there, trust is the result. So I really think that these are the three inputs that are required, to be there, and the output therefore becomes trust, because you are trusted through your actions and doing what you say you're going to do.
So when I listen to you, I say to myself, this is the kind of dynamic voice, the kind of face that we would like to see more in terms of leadership. People like yourself, like Professor Tuli Madonsela, like Lindiwe Mazibuko, young voices, strong voices, articulating with a very specific, I would say, feminist perspective, because you touch the world as a mother would, with care and concern, but with the right amount of discipline, the right amount of encouragement, and the right amount of confidence. And that, brings in a new vision to the way in which we respond and we react, and we build social cohesion from that. But your voices are few. They're few and they're far between. And young people want to identify with somebody. They want to say that, what, I see that. That gives me hope. She gives me guidance. She gives me, an understanding of a way in which things can be done, and they can be done differently compared to what they see in terms of the normal political sphere. The result, the basic result, the crass materialism as a result of patronage and cadre networks, etc. Because ultimately it's all about that splashing the cars, the money, changing the way in which our youth should appreciate and understand life. My parting question to you, Busi, is how can we bring more voices like yours to the spectrum, to the front, so that South Africans can see that South Africans are better, capable of better, and we can do better, and that we should aspire for this difference?
And I think the only way in which we get this right is to actually have the requisite and enough numbers in these forums, in these corridors of power, occupying the right seats at the table, to can actually deliver and raise the issues that actually need to be raised. You can't do this with such few numbers. And I think that is actually the tragedy that you actually have from a female leadership perspective. There's just not enough of us. you need enough of us who can actually come in and advocate, from similar things. And I agree with you. South Africa is actually derived or deprived from getting full participation from a big segment of society, because women are actually not being given their rightful space. And we're not giving our rightful place, but even when we are giving our rightful place, Dr. Suleiman, I also worry that we go in there and we are not as assertive sometimes as we should be. We can't go in there and think that we need to ask for permission to lead. We can't go in there as women leaders and be apologetic, but you must know that there is also a dear price and a heavy price that we pay for not being apologetic, for speaking truth to power. We are dealt with, and I think you're talking about Lindiwe Mazibuko, absolute brilliance. Where is she in today's politics today? Somehow the system found a way of dealing with her. And I think that is the challenge, that we don't come into environments that are conducive, to make us excel, right? You are going to be the lone voice. You are going to be treated as an outcast. And at some point, you get off the treadmill because it is just too much trouble. It is just too much work. It is too difficult, trying to pull this thing on your own. And I think you end up thinking, you know what, it's not worth it. If I'm going to choose between my well-being, and my mental wellness, versus driving the country's agenda, then I'm going to choose my wellness, above all else. And I think that is unfortunately the place where we find ourselves, But I think, there is, and if I were to say, leave aside what we are being subjected to, and maybe let's talk about what we need to be doing as women leaders who are actually coming into these spaces and how we can make a difference. And I really think that the first one, the biggest test of leadership, is to not be apologetic. We sometimes come into these positions. Yes, we come into environments that are Eurocentric and patriarchal, but I think we also need to depart from the premise that we are not coming in there, to try and be Eurocentric and patriarchal. We are not coming in there to try and mimic men in terms of how to do leadership. Our ascension into leadership doesn't mean masculinity. And yes, ours is a very burdensome ascension, because we represent the majority of the citizens of this country. To your point, when someone like me, like Lindiwe, like Thuli Madonsela ascends, whether we realize it or not, whether we accept it or not, we have a huge role model effect, and we should never underestimate that. So I really think that we really therefore need to come into these positions understanding that we can be better versions of somebody else. If you are going to try and mimic other people, you are always going to be playing catch up, as it were. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Michelle Obama in her book Becoming who referred to these double standards that we actually face. It says, I've been celebrated as the most powerful woman, and I've been told I'm an angry Black woman, and you get all those all the time. You find yourself in a situation when you are damned if you do, and you are damned if you don't. So trying to play it nice, to play it safe, to fit in, to assimilate is a pointless exercise, because you're always going to be accused of either speaking too much, or they're going to tell you not speaking enough. They are always going to tell you that you are too aggressive, or they'll tell you that you are failing to assert yourself. You'll be accused of either smiling all the time, or they'll tell you that you are always frowning and you are not approachable. So you are damned either way, so why don't you just go in there and really try and make a difference and have nothing to be apologetic about. We are enough as we are. I really think that message is going to have to come across very strongly. As female leaders, we are enough as we are. Yes, our leadership styles are not perfect, but the men are not the standard for success. The men leadership styles are not the standard for success, and I really think that there's going to have to be that internal peace that we appreciate, because maybe if we had that internal peace of not being apologetic, I don't think so many of us would have gotten off the treadmill, but look, I also understand, because it is burdensome, it is tiring, it is very costly. It comes at a high personal cost. So you end up giving, but the big piece is that the world is not ready for us. Boardrooms are not ready for us. Our politics is not ready for us. But these things you are not always going to be given. Okay, you need to. Leadership is about taking charge, Dr. Suleiman. You're not going in there and think that you still need to seek for affirmation, and you think you need to ask for permission to take charge and lead. You go in there and you be in charge. This thing is about owning it. It is about being confident, as I said earlier on, even when you are self-critical inside about what it is that you know or you don't know. It is also about acknowledging your weaknesses, because we do have them, but rather choosing to focus on your strengths, because you never become outstanding by focusing on your weaknesses. And I think very importantly, it is also about stepping up to the plate and performing as an executive equal to the task, and not as a woman, because when you ascend to leadership, you are not a woman leader. You are a leader, period. So it is also about understanding that the rules of the game and the deliverables are not going to change because there is a woman in power. So I really think that, we have waited maybe for 30 years or for 100 years, whatever the case is, to be given this. What does taking it look like? And I think we all have to define that for ourselves. When we go into these leadership positions, that this thing is not going to be given to us. You're going to have to take it. So what does take it in your own little sphere of influence look like? And I think we're going to have to therefore depart from that premise and take it from there.
And that's a very high note to end on. But I just want to touch with one last comment, which I would like to leave from you, because I get from you another very important value. And that value is the value of authenticity. Be your authentic self. That comes out a lot in what you were saying. So as if you were addressing a room full of young people, how would you then, guide them towards being their authentic selves, and remind them of the role that the youth have working together with the rest of society in building social cohesion, eliminating conflict, and trying to make sure that South Africa works towards a society where there's social justice? Because right now the youth are being tarnished with all sorts of names simply for protesting a very simple right, the right to education. And I think that seriously comes back to where you started from, 1994, graduating and not having the means. So being your authentic self, working together to build social cohesion, but also at the same time recognizing that, there is a role to play both by business, civil society, and the youth in holding the state accountable, building this legitimacy, fostering the social cohesion, and ultimately creating that state that you speak about, the state that South Africa has the potential to be. And you mentioned that earlier in your comments.
Yeah. Look, I think young people are going to have to probably maybe understand that, number one, you're going to have to probably maybe play and accept the hand that you are dealt, and find a way of how you work with the hand that you are actually dealt. And I think there is a big piece in there about understanding your own journey and your own circumstances, and also understanding that no two journeys are actually the same, and therefore trying to make sure that you succeed, with the challenges that you're actually facing, as it were. Because I think for us, coming from where we come from, a lot of this is really about trying to look at how you color outside of the box that you find yourself in, as it were. And I think it is not easy, but I think I've also found that precisely because we come from the environments that we come in, looking at the young people who are protesting at Wits, those are not sentient kids. Sentient kids don't sit with that problem, but I think these young people have to go through this and not tire, because they should understand, I think this saying is a cliche, but it's actually not, a little struggle in life is really necessary to build, a strong character, and I've really seen that with my own journey, because I think you get to appreciate more when you reach the end. You get to appreciate the journey that you have traversed, but also, you get to learn a lot, of things in that journey, because for most of us, making it is a function of necessity. Success for us is propelled by where we come from. It is less those young kids fighting. They are fighting for a bigger cause. They are fighting because they've got no cushion to fall back on. They wouldn't be giving up so much and be putting themselves on such a line of danger or in the face of danger if they had an option. So I look at them and I see, that for them, it's less about determination, but it's about having to be tough. And because if they don't succeed, if they don't get registered in those universities, if they don't acquire their education, then they really don't have, an alternative. But I think the upside, as much as the journey is difficult, the upside is that when you are accustomed to adversity, very little phases you. You are not easily discouraged because you know that you are motivated by a higher purpose. And honestly, you understand and appreciate that failure is not an option because you really have to make it. You gain fortitude, which is inherently driven by knowing that you don't have a choice but to succeed. So I think that struggle in life, or that little struggle in life, becomes necessary to build a strong character. And I think it becomes important in building the leader and the adult that you are going to become. Because you see, you can't go through something like that and not be humbled. You can't go through something like that and not be deliberate about, the decisions that you're going to take tomorrow as a leader. When you and I started where I said, I'm inherently driven by where I come from. I know that, this saying of, you've got a responsibility that when you reach the top, you have to hold the ladder firmly so that those that come behind you can actually ascend,
Yes.
to the levels where you actually. So it creates that struggle and that adversity and those challenges creates and build, that type of character, in you, it becomes personal for you because it is your own lived experience. That's why you don't think much, about telling government and telling business what needs to happen for the majority of these people, of the South African people to benefit, because you have witnessed, what people are actually subjected to. You know that they don't have an alternative. So I really think that our backgrounds really inspire certain leadership traits, and more importantly, they tend to deliver or usher in or probably maybe present this notion of servant leadership. You know that you have made it through grace, and therefore you've got a responsibility to extend a similar courtesy and similar grace to the rest that are still struggling.
Thank you very much, Busi. I would love to extend this conversation with you, but I think I've taken enough of your time, and you leave a lot for me to think about. There are very many questions, and I will raise that in the report when I write, to show the very different way in which the female leadership actually impacts in times of crisis. But once again, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and for leading us in the way that you have. You truly are an inspirational figure for many, many South Africans.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye. Bye, Busi.
Bye.